This time, Jimmy Melia's Brighton Flying Circus.
'Cause I'll stay a wild rover forever and more.
Hello and welcome to by far the greatest team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the impossible to rank once and for all who is the greatest team of all time. My name's Graham Dunn, making the case for Oxford United, where it doesn't belong, and joining me, King of the Data, Jamie Rooney.
Great. I think that's one of my favourite intros you've ever done, because that's a Times crossword right there. I mean, not only you've got like the flying circus reference in for what we're going to talk about is objects flying towards Wembley for a cup final. You're in the period of peak Monty Python as well. That's I fully commend that. That's brilliant. Good work.
Yeah, it must be kind of meaning of life territory, mustn't it, about then? But this is a fun team. This is a fun one. We are going 1983 Brighton.
Well, 1983. This is the key bit. Some of the things I wanted to share before we get into this, and I know you're going to introduce our guest, and I think I'm going to do a bit of build-up, because 1983, George Best, at the age of 36, is playing for Bournemouth, or he's on Bournemouth's books, I should say. Kevin Keegan has moved from Southampton, 1982-83, to Newcastle. And April, I think it is, or May 1983, David Pleat gives us the jig of joy. Now, what could possibly connect all three of those things, Graham?
That's a brilliant one. Yes, we only ever bring one man in for a team on the South Coast, and we welcome back South Coast Jamie. How you doing, Jamie?
Good to be back. I think this is probably my last appearance, because I think we've done all the South Coast teams now. So it's been a wonderful pleasure to be here. This might not be my finest end game, but I'll give it my best shot. Let's talk Brighton. I mean, one of the things I want to discuss with both of you is why the hell Brighton are even in this conversation. Because, I mean, I'm going to be a stickler here to a little bit. I mean, the thing is by far the greatest team, isn't it? I just want to just remind everybody it's by far the greatest team. And I did a lot of research on that. I can't see Brighton. They didn't achieve much. I don't want a spoiler alert, but just going to throw that out there, and I'll sit back in my cage now.
Well, some of these things aren't planned. They just happen over a coffee. So Graham and I get together at least once or twice a week to kind of talk through the running order of things and things we want to do and so on and so forth. I can't even remember how Brighton got into the conversation. That's how nondescript it is. And here we are, 25 hours of research solid, and we're talking about Brighton and Hove Albion.
You are actually the perfect person for this, not only with your South Coast link. There are several things that come through it all, I think. Obviously, we did Bournemouth, which similarly, we chose not to do the Bournemouth that is riding high in the Premier League now, just like Brighton are. But in that case, we chose, it must have been similar time, maybe 45, Bournemouth v Man United. So again, we kind of chose a side that not only is on the South Coast, but has one glorious FA Cup moment and not very much more. There's some other similarities with your Portsmouth side, which are worth flagging here. Just as a starter, can anyone have a guess who is responsible for converting Steve Foster from a striker to a defender? Oh, South Coast Jamie was first on the buzzer.
He beat me to the buzzer.
I think we both know the answer to this one, Jamie, don't we? I'm going to say Ian St John.
It's so
the Saint.
Good.
And Ian St John, this is where I have my shoehorned reference in, because he was Portsmouth manager at the time. Only a brief stint. And Steve Foster is a Portsmouth-born lad. And he was a striker at the time on Portsmouth's books. And it was Ian St John who converted him to a centre-back.
We did Shankly's Liverpool a couple of weeks ago, where we were talking about Ian St John. So he's made a second. And his managerial career is, I mean, does he go down as one of Portsmouth's finest managers?
What? Let's just say there isn't a statue outside the ground of him yet. And I don't think there will be.
Well, Steve Foster will be talking about a fair bit across this pod, I reckon. The other similarity, of course, with this is it's one of the three South Coast teams who are better than Portsmouth.
I can't argue with that.
Show us your medals. Surely, Jamie, show us your medals.
It's how we define this, isn't it? I mean, in the current league status, that's correct. But we don't need to get our FA Cups out and Championship medals out on the table now, do we?
I'm curious, Jamie, in your close proximity to Brighton, how do the people of Hove feel that Brighton seem to get all the credit for their incredible football team? They're almost like the Boscombe to Bournemouth.
Yeah,
they're there, but
they
really in name only. And
the silent
that's
partner.
where the Goldstone Ground used to be. I'm curious.
It's funny, isn't it? It's in terms of distance from Portsmouth to Brighton, it's about an hour or so, really. But they just don't come into the equation. Whereas you go the other direction, you've obviously got Southampton 20 minutes down the road, and you've got sort of Bournemouth sort of 40, 45 minutes down the road. They're much more in that sort of a sphere of influence.
I think Brighton and Hove Albion, their focus is not Portsmouth or Southampton. I think it's more closer to London, and they have that M23 bizarre rivalry between them and Crystal Palace, which I think goes pretty much back to around about this time when Alan Mullery probably ticked a few people off.
Yes, so Alan Mullery's at the heart of it. And Alan Mullery is at the heart of Brighton's success. Now, it's fair to say, Jamie, isn't it, that Brighton, at this point, they are not a particularly successful football club, are they?
Well, I mean, it all goes back to the age-old question, however you define success. And I will lean on you to be more of an expert in that category than myself when it comes to football teams. However, Brighton, they played in the Southern League in the early 1900s after forming in 1901 and becoming Brighton and Hove Albion when Brighton and Hove as a place didn't even exist. The council didn't exist until sometime in the 1990s. So you could argue that the football people of Brighton and Hove were well ahead of their time. And in 1921, they then moved to what was the new Third Division South. And then they proceeded to spend almost 40 years in that division. They got a promotion in the late 1950s. And that was the first time they'd moved from that division. Now, incredibly, that's not a record. The record is Arsenal. Arsenal have been in the top league for a very long time, and I don't think that's going to change for a while. But 38 years in the same league they played in. And then you've got this period in the 1970s where a certain individual takes ownership, and I think he's got some bigger and bolder plans for Brighton and Hove Albion. I'll stop saying the Hove shortly. I just want to make sure that I'm not alienating anyone from Brighton and Hove in this podcast.
Very good of you to consider that. Yeah, so this era is kind of, I suppose, the peak or towards the end of the Mike Bamber era, who's chairman for over a decade or so. Now, he's interesting because there's one of these, almost look what you could have won. Of course, after Brian Clough falls out with Sam Longston at Derby, in 1973, Brian Clough turns up as Brighton manager, which is quite odd. There didn't seem to be any obvious... I sort of tried kind of searching through to see why he ended up there. Eventually, Peter Taylor joins him as well. So, the two of them are down there. This should be a recipe for success. They don't really do very much.
When you talk about Brian Clough and Peter Taylor and their short time at Brighton, I can't help but think of the damned United. And I can't help but thinking of Timothy Small playing Peter Taylor, saying, "We're happy at Brighton, Brian." That's all I can think of when I think of Brian Clough and Peter Taylor. That's the only reference I can have. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately for Brighton and Hove Albion, Leeds United came knocking, didn't they? And unfortunately for Brian Clough, Leeds United came knocking, didn't they?
Exactly right. 44 days, glorious spell. He actually ranked Mike Bamber as the best chairman he worked with, at the time anyway. So, but I mean, he didn't have a great relationship with most of his chairmen, so it probably doesn't say a huge amount.
That's true. Brevity is clearly the key with Brian Clough.
So that doesn't lead to anything, but the recruitment of Alan Mullery does, and Alan Mullery gets Brighton into the top flight for the first time in their history. And they have a couple of seasons there where they sort of hang on and survive. And then in the previous season, they're managed by a chap called Mike Bailey. Now, unlike some of these other managers, Mullery, Jimmy Melia, Brian Clough, who there's plenty said about them, Mike Bailey, there's not an awful lot written about. And I think that's partly because most of what I get from it is that the football wasn't fantastic to watch. So they finished 13th in the season. Jimmy Melia, I think, is quoted at some point as saying that he wouldn't pay to go and watch Mike Bailey's team, which I quite like.
My notes on Mike Bailey are really, really short. I've just got successful, sensible, and a bit boring.
Apologies to Mike Bailey if there's a more to it than that. Brighton have spent a bit of money. They're not kind of massive spenders, but they do spend a bit. They spent quite a lot on Gordon Smith. They bring back Peter Ward. They've obviously got Michael Robinson there. They had Mickey Thomas there the previous year. The start of the next season, which is 82-83, so they do quite well in the home games. They win 5, I think, out of their 8 home games, which, by the way, is more games than they'll win under Jimmy Melia in the league after that. But they lose 8 of their 9 away games. I think their first 3 games are something like 5-0, 4-0 and 5-0. They end up with four goals against 30 across 9 away games. So something's clearly gone wrong. And Brighton get to mid-December and they decide, okay, we've had enough of Bailey, we need to replace him. And that is the point in which Jimmy Melia enters our story. He's chief scout at the time, and he comes in as a caretaker manager, but there's no reason to think that Jimmy Melia is going to get a top-flight manager's job at that time.
No, I mean, as you mentioned, he's scouting, and I think he takes a role, it's a 50-50 role as well, just to kind of fill in the gap. And he has got no real manager depth or pedigree of such. And, you know, he pretty much looks like a nightclub owner who's accidentally taken a football team all the way to Wembley. So he's not your typical choice, but it's just one of those moments in life, I guess. It just seems to be the right person at the right time with the right football team in the right moment.
Obviously, you mentioned Ian St. John and that Shankly side, but Melia was part of that team as well, isn't he? He played a shed load of games for Liverpool, didn't he? Yeah, he's a Liverpudlian.
He's born and bred. Played for Liverpool as a junior, and then played I think all 300 games in Shankly's Part 1, as we did. So that first Shankly team that comes through the second division into the first division and ends up going on and wins 2 championships. And I think Jimmy Melia is definitely on the first one. I can't remember if he's in the second one. And then, after that, he has a fairly good spell with some other clubs, Southampton and Aldershot in particular. But as a football manager, it never really lands. And he has jobs, but he's in and out of them quickly, and he's off to the States. And I think he's in a period where he's just doing scouting, I think he mentioned, at Brighton, which seems strange because when you learn about Jimmy Melia, you realise that he's incredibly charismatic. He's incredibly interesting. And he's definitely got something about that because the personal life seems to validate there's something about the man that's worth investing in.
I think the starting point is that, as with a lot of things in the 1980s, Jimmy Melia looks considerably older than 45 years. At least in my mind, he was definitely much older. And
he definitely has a touch of the Greg Downs about him, that's for sure.
That takes you back to an old podcast, that one. He does, though, doesn't he? Melia obviously has something about him, a charisma, because he's 5'7", isn't he? He looks like he's 85 at the time, and he's got a 27-year-old girlfriend who my research said is an ex-dancer. It doesn't specify whether that's ballroom or disco or whatever. So he's obviously got something about him because, as you said, Jamie, I mean, he's at Crewe Alexandra, I think, as a manager, and then he goes over to and manages the Cleveland Cobras in the States, and then he comes back over to Brighton as a scout, and then he gets kind of shifted into the limelight from there, and that's when things get interesting because they get on their cup run, don't they? The league form, as Graham alluded to, doesn't pick up. And in fact, it gets even worse. But he rides this kind of wave of the cup run, which kind of keeps him in post. And he's kind of fueled. The press love him because of his charisma. And he's got a hot girlfriend who's, only 18 years younger than him.
Jamie, you had your description. My description of him was that Jimmy Melia is a man having the time of his life, or is a man having a midlife crisis. It all depends on what your perspective is on it. But I say fair play to him. He absolutely is living his best life during this period.
It's Val Lloyd, I think, from my research. And yeah, she's considerably younger than Jimmy Melia, but he's definitely got this flamboyance about him that makes him an attractive proposition. But there's a brilliant moment in the lead up to the final where Silky Des Lynam, who in 1983 is probably just coming into prime, isn't he really? I think he's in like an open top bus or a convertible car with Jimmy Melia and his girlfriend Val Lloyd in the back, and Des Lynam is focused and interviewing Jimmy Melia's girlfriend, and he's asking questions like, "Sir, what dress are you going to wear for the cup final?" And she's going into detail, and Lynam is super invested. He's listening to every word, and the camera doesn't unfortunately cut to Jimmy Melia, who I like to think is just watching this, thinking, "Hey, is he cracking on my bird?"
I went down that rabbit hole further, Jamie, but after the semi-final, and I might be jumping ahead here, but there's a press cutting which is Cup Final King and his disco dolly, and there's a great picture of Melia with Val Lloyd out dancing. And then whether that's staged or not, I don't know. It's quoted here as Jimmy is dressed to kill in black leather trousers, an open shirt, and plans to marry Val. She said, "The sooner the better." And it's quoted. But I searched everywhere and I couldn't find out whether he actually made an honest woman of her. And I'm a little upset by that. And of course, he had the nickname Disco Style. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know what disco style of dress is. So I looked it up. Bear with me here. So disco style, according to ChatGPT, is a 1970s fashion trend defined by glamorous, dance-friendly and reflective clothing designed to stand out under club lights. Key elements include sequins, metallic fabrics, spandex, and bold silhouettes like jumpsuits and flares. It emphasizes body-conscious styles such as wrap dresses, halter tops, and platform shoes. Now, I know he wore white shoes, didn't he, for the final, and he opened his neck shirt a little bit. I still don't think he qualifies as disco style.
I could be doing him a disservice. There might be more in his locker, but it feels more wedding territory. But but he's he is an absolute character, and it is interesting as you said. It's a joint appointment. I think it's with reserve team coach
George Aiken,
and it almost feels like there's not a conscious decision. It's just the way it's going to happen. That Jimmy Melia is going to be the one who takes the limelight, and actually it's something he's kind of born for. And I think they win that first game at home to Norwich 3-0, and they're playing some promising, more expansive football. It's all the good times are here. But as you say, in terms of the league, the good times aren't there. They don't win. And looking at it, I mean, he wins. I think it's three more games in the next 24. So I think it's 4 wins in 25 league games. There's absolutely no way he'd get appointed in today's football, but he does keep winning FA Cup games and really, really big FA Cup games. So we'll come on to the Liverpool one in a minute, and that seems to just keep getting things over the line. And of course, Brighton have never got to the FA Cup final, and as we'll talk about in the second half when we dive into that FA Cup final. The FA Cup final in 1983 is an absolutely massive game.
Classic 1980s Cup final TV, isn't it? We've been here before.
It's what we all grew up on, though, isn't it? It's everything we've discussed. Even when I've been on pods, we've discussed these FA Cup finals. And Melia embraces that with both hands, doesn't he, in everything he does? I mean, it's not an open-top bus he arrives at the ground in. How do you up that?
But Brighton at this point, that season is sort of unwinding. Everything's going a little wrong. Steve Foster, who's obviously their star player. Now, he's just broken into the England team at this stage. He's sort of negotiating for a new contract or improved terms or whatever. So he asks for a transfer. Michael Robinson, he's a bit disillusioned with lack of signing, so he asks for a transfer. Neil McNabb, who goes on to have quite a successful time for Man City for the rest of after that move. But he seems to be shipped out. I think he suggests that Mike Bamber's interfering in team selection almost, or bits and pieces. So it's quite an unhappy camp. And even Gordon Smith, who's going to have quite a big role to play, shocker to anyone who doesn't know this game, he goes out on loan to Rangers for earlier in the season. So there's a lot. That side is struggling a bit. Foster and Robinson kind of settle down, so they obviously stay at the club for that season. And then the FA Cup run begins.
Doesn't start off brilliantly. They draw against Newcastle in the third round, who are second tier. They drew 1-1. It's a pretty decent Newcastle. Kevin Keegan, as references there, Chris Waddle's in this team, Imran Varadi's in this team, and then they have to go to St James's for the replay. Now, they win the replay 1-0, and Newcastle score, from what I can see, and it's pretty poor television footage on YouTube, so it's really hard to see. But Newcastle seem to score two fairly legitimate goals that, for whatever reason, the referees ruled them out. One, I think he rules out for Imran Varadi handballing it. And the second one, I think he's ruled out somebody giving Michael Robinson a push in the back. Now, I've watched it a few times. I can't really see anything in those two goals, but the pictures are pretty bad. But they're starting off with a bit of the old FA Cup magic of luck, so they've got a bit of luck on their side in the early rounds.
They then hammer Man City in the fourth round, 4-0, a very comfortable.
Well, as we know, it's not a very good Man City because they get relegated as well, and that's where we get the jig of joy.
And this sets up probably the biggest game of the run aside from the Cup final itself, which is the trip to Bob Paisley's Anfield, where Brighton are absolute rank outsiders to get anything out of this.
They are, because Liverpool are destined to win the league that season. Brighton are destined to be relegated bottom this season. But there's a little bit of added spice, isn't there? Because you've got a couple of Scousers in that team, Jimmy Melia being one of them, a very successful player, and Jimmy Case also being a very successful player. And it's Case who turns up and delivers a fantastic performance to help get them over the line there. I think the result is 2-1. I think they win that game.
Phil Neal misses a penalty to make it 2-2. But you can see how this would sort of happen. You could just imagine how much Melia was up for the trip. And in fact, Jimmy Case, who sort of never let anyone down at Liverpool, did he? He was always, he was there a fair while. He was pretty solid. Well, my memory of Jimmy Case as a player was that Jimmy Case was someone who could put a tackle in, and someone who had an absolutely massive shot. And that's largely...
He was, and he was. I had the pleasure of meeting Jimmy Case very briefly. He was handing out the awards at a kids' soccer tournament in Southampton when he was playing at Southampton. Very quietly spoken, He absolutely used to like putting his foot in on the football pitch, and I'm saying this with a blue heart, but I think he was underrated a little bit at Southampton in terms of what he did in that midfield. And as you say, Jamie, he gave everything whenever he played. He gave it all, and for that Liverpool game, he would have been, and he was. But of course, he would have been right up for it, as was Melia. Because I think reading a little bit around Melia at his time at Liverpool, I think he got a bit irked with Shankly on a few occasions where Shankly dropped him and didn't play him, and then they let him go and all that kind of stuff. So, there were two of them in that team who absolutely wanted to put something over on them there.
But Liverpool, I think, Jamie, you referenced they're going for the domestic double. It was actually a domestic treble. So they're nailed on to win the league. Their closest rivals are Graham Taylor's Watford, who are having their first season in the top flight. Already won the League Cup. They're nailed on for the Championship, and they're going for what would have been the first ever domestic treble if they'd have got through to the quarterfinals and beyond. And Liverpool hadn't lost a home cup game in the last 64 matches. So it's an incredible achievement that Brighton have. And, this is the bit where the belief and Jimmy Melia's belief and the team's belief that we can actually win this thing. Now we're in the last 8 and we've beaten the best team in the country.
And of course, having beaten Liverpool at Anfield, biggest shock of the season, they have to stick with Melia. It may not be going well in the league, but okay, we'll put all our chips on the FA Cup. And actually watch kind of extended highlights of the quarterfinal and the semi-final, as well as the FA Cup. And I kind of remembered the FA Cup performance, which of course was quite a backs to the wall, bodies on the line kind of defending, which you'd expect, playing Man United, they were third in the league. The game against Norwich, the semi-final against Sheffield Wednesday, but they are playing with that bodies on the line, last ditch kind of throw themselves. They're playing some quite nice stuff in between times, but there's also, it's a little bit chaotic. And yeah, Norwich have some, in that quarterfinal, Norwich have some really good chances, to be honest, before Jimmy Case burst through again. Jimmy Case, who scores for the third consecutive round, and Brighton through to the semi-finals. That's the point at which, okay, we've got no option but to make Jimmy Melia permanent manager now. And it's only Jimmy Melia. By this stage, it's just him. He gets the job outright. And they're all set up for a semi-final against Sheffield Wednesday. Now, I don't know if you've seen any of the footage from that Sheffield Wednesday game. So Jimmy Case's free kick is just absolutely fantastic. There's a brilliant angle from behind the goal where you see, he's just really hit it down the middle, but he's absolutely slammed it, and then he's hit it with a bit of fade and bend away. So it's not even gone into a corner, but he's hit it so hard and it's bent quite late, and then it smashes the underside of the bar, and it is absolutely beautiful. The other bit from my research on this was that Sheffield Wednesday set off for the game without two of their players, two of them had to get a taxi.
This is what football's missing, isn't it? You just want Man City to leave a couple of players behind when they get on the coach.
So Jimmy Case gets the first goal, but actually Sheffield Wednesday do equalise, and it's just sort of all going to the wire a bit, and then there is a winning goal, culmination of some good work from Gordon Smith, who then squares it for Michael Robinson to get the...
How that will turn the other way, huh?
How that will turn. And so there we have it. Brighton, who are on course for relegation at this stage, have made it to their first FA Cup final.
Graham, one thing they did between the two games, the semi-final and the FA Cup final as well, because this goes back to when the transfer window went all the way to the end of March, they sell Andy Ritchie. Now, Andy Ritchie has been playing and doing pretty decent stuff for Brighton that season, and they sell him off to Leeds United. And I think it kind of makes Andy Ritchie one of the most unlucky. He's almost suffering the Michael Ballocks, but from a different perspective, because Andy Ritchie's breakout season really was in the late 70s, 78, 79. He's with Dave Sexton's Manchester United, and he plays in every single round of the FA Cup when Manchester United gets to the final and play Arsenal. And it's in the era where there's only one substitute. Brian Greenough gets that nod, and Andy Ritchie's the 13th man, and he doesn't get on. So he misses an FA Cup final. He then moves to Brighton. I think he plays in every round during this Brighton run as well. And he's contributed. And then he gets sold, and then he sees his teammates make another FA Cup final that he's not part of. And then we know from Oldham Athletic, when he's at Oldham Athletic in the latter part of his career with Joe Royle, he gets to another semi-final where this time he does play, but loses out to a very late Mark Robins goal and doesn't make that final. There's something about Andy Ritchie that gives me the Michael Ballot.
They swap Andy Ritchie for Terry Connor, who is obviously cup-tied, so not able to play, but Terry Connor, who I think goes on to play for Portsmouth, amongst others.
Yes, indeed. I was actually always a big Terry Connor fan. Always a bit injured, but when he was playing, I loved him.
Before we get to the final, which we'll pick up after 8, there's probably one other game that is worth noting in the build-up to all of this, and that is a league game. I assume it's a couple of weeks before the FA Cup final, by which point Brighton are relegated. I think there's about 10 points gap, so they would have been down by certainly April, I would think. But yes, there's a game away at Notts County where Steve Foster picks up a yellow card. He qualifies, I think, for a 2-match ban, and because of the way it works, that then puts him out of the FA Cup final. I think he must get booked in the first half, or the message gets through to him at some point in the second half, but maybe they discuss it at halftime. But they realise that if he gets sent off, I think the ban happens straight off, and he'll be available for the FA Cup final. So I've read a couple of things about that, including there's a great interview from Steve Foster himself talking about it. Second half, all he was trying to do was get himself sent off.
Yeah, I read the same.
He said, I must have made about a dozen fouls. He said at one point he caught the ball. He physically caught the ball and still didn't get.
I remember Foster not being available for the FA Cup finals being a really big deal. Now, that might be because I was on the South Coast and South Coast media was just all over this. And obviously being in and around Portsmouth, he was a Portsmouth lad. I just remember it being huge down here as a, what was I, 10, 11 at the time. Even I was feeling sorry for Steve Foster that he couldn't play in that final. It may be my kid memory here, but I'm sure they were trying to change the rules or something to get him to be able to play that game.
Yeah, I think there's some attempt to try a kind of legal, sort of try almost everything to get. And it is, this is where the ban is a bit nonsensical, isn't it? You pick up another yellow card in, and Steve Foster later played for Oxford, so I know how many bookings he was capable of picking up. He presumably played in a cup final or two for Luton, or at least a League Cup final. But, you talk about the biggest game. For these Brighton players, this will be the biggest game of virtually almost everyone on that team's life. So to get that deprived by picking up a yellow card at Notts County does feel unfair, really.
It does. I think in tribute now that we've talked about Steve Foster being banned for the FA Cup final, I feel I just need to honour him in the right way. I think it's important from this moment onwards that I pay tribute to Steve Foster in the right way because he's not around to wear his glorious headband himself.
It was an iconic bit of kit, wasn't it? The Steve Foster headband. But it became a lucky charm thing, I believe, where he cut his head out one time and stuck it on and they won the game. And so he kind of kept on wearing the headband, didn't he? So correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I remember it. He was iconic for it.
Go on, Jamie. I know you've done some headband research.
Well, yeah, not as much as I'd liked. I think the angle that I was trying to find, I wasn't successful. But I mean, this is 1983, and headbands they're a fairly newish thing in sport. Now, they do go back, if you do really want to get bored of the history of headband, there's a French tennis player, a lady who wore a headband in the 1920s, and that's kind of where they say the origins of the headband is. But it really starts in the 1970s, and it's tennis and basketball that kind of elevates this kind of sartorial headwear that you can wear whilst you're, taking part in sport. And I think the function, I guess, is head protection or to stop sweat from going in your eyes. If you go back to the 1970s, the glorious 1970s, and Bjorn Borg and John McEnroe, I mean, it was a battle. It was a battle of the heavyweight headbands, wasn't it, really? But the only footballer I could think of back then, other than Steve Foster, and there's probably a great reason for this, who wore a headband, was Socrates, the Brazilian, because he looks so cool in the headband. I mean, who would dare try to look anywhere near as good as that? You're setting yourself up for failure. They didn't seem to catch on in football. It's only really in the birth of the kind of the heterosexuals of the early 2000s, the David Beckham era, where Alice bands and hairbands become more of a feature and more of a fashion item that footballers have to put on when they go out onto the pitch. But back in 1983, Steve Foster was iconic with his headband, absolutely iconic.
It is difficult to think of many other players who did it. One I remember, and it will be a similar thing because, as you say, he gets kicked and he's trying to keep he has to stop the wound from reopening up. Gets kicked by Michael Robinson apparently as well. It's not in a John Hartson fashion, but and so he's got a sticking plaster essentially on it, and then he puts the headband over it. Now, I don't know if you remember Watford central defender Steve Terry. He didn't have the plaster, the headband. He would have the big plaster on there, which is...
He did, didn't he? I remember this, yeah. He would just have the big piece of plastic plaster on his head. That is a brilliant throwback, Graham. That's caught me off guard. I completely forgot about that. That's brilliant.
Yeah. Bearing in mind, that's what Steve Foster could have done. I don't know why Steve Terry didn't go headband. Only once Steve Foster had done it, maybe nobody else could do it because it was so iconic. I say no one else can do it. I do have one other headband thing I can bring to the party, because Steve Foster does play for Oxford United in his later careers. He's signed by Brian Horton, who was a teammate of his at Brighton, actually. You remember him as at Luton, but it was at Brighton where he was a teammate. And we had Steve Foster, I think, for maybe 3 seasons, 89 to 92. And it's going okay, but Brian Horton decides summer 1991, something has to change. Having one player with a headband on the pitch isn't enough. So that summer, Oxford signed Trevor Aylott, another player renowned for wearing a headband. And I can tell you, and I do have footage to prove this, but Oxford beats Newcastle. Amazingly, they beat Ozzy Ardiles Newcastle United 5-2 at the Manor in early 1992. 3 of the goals are scored by headbanded Oxford players. Steve Foster scores 2 and Trevor Aylott gets a 3rd.
That's incredible.
I think you'd struggle to have 2 players who, by choice, not by injury, are headband wearers, white headband wearers. Quite impressive.
Graham, I just thought you brought your A game today. The intro was absolutely first class, and you've probably just made your greatest Oxford United reference ever since you've been doing these things.
This one was actually worth it. Excellent. Okay, well, we're going to get stuck into the FA Cup final itself, and we'll do that in the second half. Excellent. So welcome back. We're looking at Jimmy Melia's Brighton, who incredibly, whilst having got relegated, have made it to the FA Cup final. That is a really unusual thing, actually, isn't it? To get to Wembley and get to an FA Cup final and get relegated in the same season. Has any other team done that, Jamie?
Oh, you caught me. You caught me.
Maybe
We're going to have left it.
Maybe our South Coast correspondent could comment on this.
Yeah, I've witnessed that happen firsthand. Actually, yeah. You know what? I wonder if any other team has done that apart from ourselves and Brighton. And the memories were too painful that I decided I wouldn't even look it up. But yeah, I've been at Wembley Stadium as a relegated Premier League team watching us lose to Chelsea. Yeah,
I forgot that Portsmouth got relegated. Actually.
It's not unlike the Brighton one, because I think you had a points deduction and it was obvious you were going to get relegated from a long time ago. Yeah. And that's Avram Grant, isn't it? And that's where he kind of he just gets them up for. Do you know that's not the season you knocked United out, is it? It's the
no, it's 2010, I think it is, isn't it?
That's the season. We're going off piste here, but that's the season that we play Spurs in the semi-final at Wembley, and Redknapp's jumped ship earlier on in the season, and the Spurs fans are absolutely loving it because they're telling how many goals they're going to put past us. And it's one of my favourite ever Pompey games to be at is the 2-0 over Spurs in that semi-final with Redknapp in the dugout there. A joyous moment. But yeah, anyway, enough about that.
The only other team of a sort of a modernish era I could find was Leicester City in 1969 who do that.
Okay.
There is one team that wins the FA Cup and gets relegated, as Jamie flagged, the mighty Wigan Athletic.
Yes.
But it's weird. There is a weird time in cup football, because if Brighton, and spoiler here, Brighton don't win this cup final, but if Brighton did win it, it should rank as like the most incredible shot, because you have very clearly bottom playing third in the league. But this is in an era where 3 second division teams have won the FA Cup in the last 10 years.
It was mental, wasn't it? Because West Ham won it. That's the one that immediately sprung to mind with me, because I remember seeing that and thinking, well, they put up a pretty decent fight. I mean, if you spin it around to the modern era now, isn't it? Burnley or Wolves sort of taking on Arsenal, Man City, it's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. But yeah, to sort of see that, and again, we'll get into it, but Brian was so close to doing it.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yes, so back here we are. It's May 1983. We probably getting up at about 9 o'clock to watch Cup Final Swap Shop or Cup Final Tiswas or whatever was on at the time.
Yeah.
And then obviously Cup Final Grandstand starts. I think at this era we must have still been at the kind of 11 o'clock start or something like that.
It was, yeah. It's in that classic era where the only real decision you need to make is, am I BBC or am I ITV?
Yeah.
Because the coverage of this particular day officially starts at 11 o'clock. But you're right, Graham, Tiswas and Swap Shop would have all had cup final themed segments going on to kind of, that hors d'oeuvre before you get to the starter and then the main event and then the dessert. 11 o'clock, both schedules would have started. And some of it does cross-pollinate in terms of what they're covering. But yeah, you've got to make a decision. Are you BBC One, are you ITV, or you flipping channels? And flipping channels in those days, it's not as easy as being sat on the sofa and just pressing a button. You have to physically get up from the sofa. You have to walk to where your television set is. And on your 16-inch TV, some people had black and white TVs back then, you have to physically push force into a button to turn it over.
Yeah.
It's incredible, isn't it?
So, BBC or ITV, did you have a game plan? I tended to mix between the two.
I think you've got to mix between the two, because if they're interviewing a player you don't particularly like, or they're doing a FA Cup, it's the knockout, or question of sport, and you flick over and you've made the effort to get out of your sofa, you've pressed the button to ITV and they're on an ad break. I mean, you've just lucked out big time. You go back to the sofa, but I would surf it between the two, and I would be very, as I said there, really, if I don't like the player who's being sent up or on a question of sport FA Cup final day, I'm back over onto the other side. I will sleep around on that FA Cup day.
Likewise, I would sleep around, but I'd always come home to the BBC and John Watson, Barry Davis at the time. Whereas I think you were Brian Moore, weren't you, Jamie?
Yeah, I think I was more ITV than BBC, but I mean, at this point in my life, it would have been whatever my dad had decided.
The footage I did find of the game to watch again, or the highlights package, was the ITV coverage. I'm sure I'm right that the co-commentator on the 1983 Cup final is Graham Souness. It's definitely somebody called Graham, and it's definitely someone who sounds remarkably like Graham Souness. But I'm thinking Souness could have only been mid-20s, something like that. I don't know, late 20s.
Still very much playing, yeah.
Whoever it is very good. But I'm certain it's Graham Souness.
Just to kind of match that, the BBC, this gets lost. I forget about this as well. This is an era where Bobby Charlton was a regular TV pundit on the BBC. Yeah. So in the early 1980s, he would pop up, for these key games in the FA Cup finals and for the World Cup, and he would be one of your pundits. I think people probably of a certain age won't ever realise that Bobby Charlton, the great Manchester United and England footballer, was a regular TV pundit in the 1980s after football management was something that he couldn't do, and before he became an ambassador of Manchester United and club director.
Yeah, in fact, Jack Charlton, he did quite a bit. And I think, wasn't he on some of those early ITV pundit ones as well, wasn't he? He was part of that. Jack Charlton was always slightly more incomprehensible, I think.
It's remarkable to think they're brothers because they're so different in every aspect.
So you've both kind of semi-referenced this before. Brighton have quite a novel idea as to how they're going to get to the FA Cup final.
It's unique. I don't think it's ever been done before. I mean, it would have been done before, and it certainly hasn't been done since in my living memory.
No, the only... Sorry, Jamie. I was looking at, as I say, the elephant in the room here, or the helicopter in the room, isn't it? More than anything, it's the helicopter trip. And I just want to cut in here, and I'll hand it back to you, Jamie. But I just want to say I was thinking of any other helicopter player references, and the only one I could think of was, of course, Kevin Keegan, who, after his final game at Newcastle, decided to leave via a helicopter. And I can't think of any other helicopter type footballing references. So I think the Brighton team and Melia get the nod in terms of the most footballers in a helicopter match day experience. Keegan did it on a one-off.
It's fantastic. I mean, it just seems a strange way to travel as well. I mean, they're only in the air for like 15, 20 minutes. They actually go over the United bus, according to Ron Atkinson, who very inappropriately, unusually for Ron Atkinson, shares a joke. Wouldn't it be funny if that crashed? What are we going to do for the afternoon?
Kind of etched in your memory. It's one of the things you kind of just remember about that final. It hadn't really occurred to me. And then I was in my mind, I said, well, What did they land on? Did they land on the pitch, or what happened? Of course, they can't land anywhere near the place. They land out a mile away, don't they?
They had to get a bus.
Yeah.
They took a bus to get a helicopter, to take a helicopter to get a bus to get to Wembley.
Anybody know when this helicopter was previously used?
Okay, so I wanted to say that it was Noel Edmonds flying Phil Collins from Live Aid through to...
No, not that one, but I like it.
I can only think the Falklands.
That's much better than the actual story, I think. It was flown into battle. No, allegedly it was used in the Pope's visit previously. So on the last papal visit, that helicopter was used. And there's a superb quote from Jimmy Melia, because Tony Gubber says, I believe this helicopter was used for the Pope's recent visit. And Melia, talking in the third person, which is always what I like about sports people, says, if it's good enough for the Pope, it's good enough for Jimmy Melia, which is
Great.
You can watch him say that on the Gubber interview. It's brilliant.
I mean, the whole thing's fascinating as well, because bless his heart, David Coleman, an absolute legend of British TV broadcasting, is solely describing the Brighton team arriving in a bus, waiting in the bus, waiting to get onto the helicopter, describing what they're wearing. When they're on the helicopter, they're waiting God knows how long before the helicopter actually takes place. He has to describe all of this going on, and there's not much to say. And then he does this most fantastic thing, and obviously he's been helped out by his TV producer. He goes, and while the Brighton players are on the bus, and there's just the wonderful, he's like the helicopter stewardesses. So he's keeping the sexist theme going in this podcast today. While they close the door, we're just going to play you out with Brighton's FA Cup song. I mean, it's awful.
Yeah,
pictures are awful. The FA Cup song is awful.
It's a real throwback, actually. Song. Listening to it feels like it could have been done in like 1974 or something. And this is a period we'd had 2 Spurs songs by then. We obviously got Coventry City's fantastic cup song to come. I mean, a year earlier, but we'd have had the World Cup squad.
22. Hear the roar of the red, white, and blue. Yeah, the Boys in Old Brighton Blue was a song. I did look it up. It charted its highest position was 138 in the UK charts, which was just over 100 places behind Glory Glory Man United, who also had a FA Cup final song, which had 1 week in the pop charts and got to 35 and then dropped out the following week.
Yeah.
Can you imagine footballers of today in the social media world that we live in, where footballers are controlled with media training and they have contracts that have their media rights and their access and their image rights all dotted and T'd? Can you imagine in this era having an FA Cup final song where the FA Cup final it's been trivialised? It's just gone. It's never going to happen again, is it? It's one of those things, if it happened, it's going to have to be a lower division team that gets to the final that no one expects, and they're just going to bring back nostalgia.
Yeah, bring it back.
They get the backing and everyone behind them. I just can't imagine.
Yeah, no, this is true. There's a whole thing, actually. David Coleman spends a fair chunk of the time slightly concerned as to whether the plane will be able to take off because the weather's so bad. And it is worth saying, so when we get to the game, that Wembley pitch is absolutely massacred, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not the bowling green you get used to these days, is it? You look when it goes to extra time and it's bobbly out there. It's good though, isn't it? Because I was watching the final before the replay and it just takes me back. I'm loving seeing footballers with 1 to 11 on their backs. And I love that there's a couple of great goalmouth scrambles as well, where it just turns all Sunday league. And you were saying about sort of Brighton's backs to the wall sort of approach. And it was great. Yeah, it was great. You know, the short shorts.
It's proper short shorts.
You know, yeah, it's how I remembered it.
And it's got a whole sort of Sabutio feel to it as well. Red kit, blue kit. It's really sort of simple. The dugouts are quite simple.
Yeah.
Somebody's smoking on the Brighton dugout, which I love. They're just kind of, it's like a different era.
Yeah,
You've got when the goals go in, you've got ball boys and photographers by the goals, and of course you get them jumping up and cheering. Which again, you just don't really get that in the neutrals in inverted brackets doing that these days, do you?
They're all hidden now, aren't they? The photographers generally all hidden behind the sponsorship advertising boards. But back then, they could just sit within 2 meters of the goal line.
Yeah.
And you're right, when Brighton go one up, they're just jumping up and leaping. It's brilliant. And then obviously as a Manchester United fan, I was eagle-eyed in the second half when United get a goal at that end. No one's jumping up and getting excited.
Yeah, I mean, we should at this point explain that both me and South Coast Jamie would have definitely been supporting one team. That you wouldn't. And our perspectives on this final might be quite different from you.
Just to add as well, I just wanted to finish off the scene setting. I mean, the attendance there, 99,059. It's great to have, just the madness of a couple short of 100,000 there again. That's great. I miss it.
Which is brilliant to see. And, I expect if you're like Bamber or Brighton part of the Brighton Chem, you might be wondering, where are all these Brighton fans at the Goldstone ground? Because I don't think they were selling out there.
Yeah.
It's definitely worth talking about Gary Stevens and Steve Gatting, who I think are the centre-back pairing for this, because this is a point where there's only one Gary Stevens, except it turns out there are two. There are two fantastic Gary Stevens playing at the same time.
So I remember Gary Stevens, obviously, in this game. This is the first cup final that I watched with Manchester United that they won. I remember the 79. This is the first time I actually experienced the joy of winning a trophy as a Manchester United fan. Fortunately for me, when they won a trophy in the 1980s, it wasn't the last time, unlike some people, unfortunately. Gary Stevens, I do remember at Tottenham, and I remember him as a right back. And Brighton, he's a central defender. And I try to work out what shape Brighton are playing. I think it's 4-3-3, but you've got Gary Stevens, who's a central defender, Steve Foster, who's suspended for the first game in the final, who's a central defender, and you've got Gatting, who also plays as a central defender, but can also play in midfield as a defensive midfielder. But then Tony Grealish, the man who's captain in the day and wearing the headband, is also playing as a defensive midfielder. So I think Brighton are playing a 4-3-3, and Gary Stevens is in that central defender role, which when I look back on my memory of Gary Stevens, he was a right back at Tottenham.
He definitely also played midfield as well, did a holding midfield job as well. And he ended up at Portsmouth at one stage.
He did.
Didn't he?
Yeah, he was. Of course, he was the old school utility player. He could play left back, centre back, right back, and in midfield. So it was the end of his career, sadly, for him and for us at Portsmouth.
You're right, Graham, as well. He did get picked for England, as did Everton's Gary Stevens. So you had the two Gary Stevens in the same England squad at the same time. Now, I can't possibly say this is true, but Bobby Robson, who was the England manager at the time, he's a wonderful genius of a football manager and a lovely guy, probably one of the most wonderful people there's ever been in the game of football in terms of his contribution and generosity. But he could be a bit of a bumbling idiot. So I like to think that Bobby Robson knew he needed Gary Stevens in the squad, but he wasn't sure which one. So he wasn't taking any chances. So he thought, I'll have both of them just to make sure he's going belt and braces.
I love that.
Absolutely. Alongside him is Steve Gatting. Now we have to talk the Gattings, who are an absolutely incredible family. Now, we were talking about how Jack and Bobby Charlton don't appear to be brothers. In one really key aspect, Mike Gatting and Steve Gatting do not appear to be brothers either, because they are both gifted cricketers and footballers. So Mike Gatting was very close to making it as a goalkeeper. I read that he was on a trial, and there were two keepers who were going for the slot at, I think it must have been West Ham or QPR, West Ham probably. And Phil Parkes is the one who gets the nod instead of Mike Gatting, who then goes to concentrate on his football career. But you can't help, on his cricket career, but you can't help but think Mike Gatting would be, I mean, let's assume he could keep the weight off. Mike Gatting would be too small to be a goalkeeper, surely.
Yeah.
That seems extraordinary.
But then that opens a rabbit hole. Why didn't he put himself forward to being a wicket keeper? Because he wasn't, was he? He was a slip fielder.
It's essentially the same discipline. Goalkeepers, wicket keepers, it's the same discipline.
Exactly.
It's diving.
It's just all a ball. You got gloves on.
Steve Gatting goes on to have a successful career. He plays 300 odd games for Brighton. He plays 50 odd for Arsenal. So he's a real stalwart there. And after retiring, he plays second 11 cricket for Middlesex. So, they are both clearly quite gifted. Oh, and Joe Gatting, who I think is Steve Gatting's son. He goes on to play professional football for Brighton. So he plays 44 games for them, and then having given that up in 2009, gives up full-time football to play full-time professional cricket and plays for Sussex and Hampshire quite successfully. The Gattings are an absolutely mad. They have to be the most successful football cricket family that there's ever been.
Yeah, I think football cricket is definitely the specific term there. There is a page, and it's massive, that does list sporting families where you've got parents and siblings that have gone into sport and what sports they play. So you could trawl through that to possibly rival the Gattins. The only one I can think of, and it's definitely not football and cricket, but it's football and netball, is the Nevilles. So you got obviously Philip and Gary Neville, who had pretty good careers club-wise, had pretty good careers at international level, were both potentially good cricketers. I think they could have got. I think Philip Neville could have been a pro cricketer if he hadn't chosen football. And then you've got Tracy Neville, who goes on and becomes a prolific member of the England netball team and also a future England netball coach after her career finishes. So the only family I could think of that could rival the Gattins is the Nevilles. But I think it would make a great TV show, the Gattins or the Nevilles. You know, which one is it to be? Anyway,
we do appear to have gone a bit off track. We should get into this game. Brighton take the lead, and you've got to feel sorry for Gordon Smith because it's a decent header.
It is.
It's a good goal. It's a very good goal. Not many people score in an FA Cup final. He scored in the 14th minute. He's given Brighton a shot lead. At this stage, he must be thinking the headlines are going to be good today.
Yeah. I mean, the worst thing that he's got out of this by scoring the first goal is that people are going to remember him for this FA Cup final, right?
It's pretty much for their first attack, I think. But Brighton take the lead. It's a well-worked goal. It's a good cross from Neil Smiley, a.k.a. Vince from Just Good Friends at the time.
So glad you did that.
I mean, he really is. It's the likeness is too scary. And Paul Nicholas is about 50 by the time he does that. So I don't know how it can be look quite the same, but great crossing, and it is a really good header from Smith to give them the lead. And then kind of the rest of that half is the game quickly drifts into this pattern of Brighton really having to sit on that lead, isn't it? And it's all very last ditch, but they're defending brilliantly. Yeah, they hold on to their advantage. I mean, I came into this trying to work out what Jimmy Melia's style of play was, and it's really difficult because he's not really been a manager for a great length of time to really define any style of play. But Brighton are fairly direct. They want to get the ball forward, but they've got men behind the ball. But then when I look at the shape, I think it is, it says it's 4-4-2 when I look on Wikipedia, but I think it's more like a 4-3-3 or 4-5-1, I would say. So, yeah, they have got men behind the ball. The pitch you've already referenced, I think the pitch is definitely playing a role. It's cutting up really badly as the match is going on. It's really deteriorating, and it's affecting both teams, really. So Ron Atkinson did like to play football, but the pitch was not conducive to the type of football they needed to play. So I think the reset comes at a good time for both teams at half-time. Brighton have the lead. They can kind of rest in terms of how they're going to approach the second half, and Atkinson has an opportunity to rethink how United are going to get back into this game. And this Brighton side, I think, certainly watching it, the only way you see them winning this game is holding on to that 1-0, isn't it? You just think that, it's going to be a long, old battle. And United equalise in the second half. Frank Stapleton gets on the end of a McDuxbury cross. And once they've equalised, if that sort of feels like the moment, because you're not quite sure where Brighton can go beyond that. It is worth noting, though, when the two teams met
during the season in the league, Brighton won 1-0 at home and they drew away to United. So they haven't lost to this Ron Atkinson's Manchester United that season.
And this Man United hasn't won anything at this stage, has it?
No, and they've been in contention with Liverpool in the early stages for a league championship. But typical Atkinson, we've done this with Rick. They don't perform in the second half of the season. They start well, they end flat. But it's a bit of absolute wizardry from Wilkins. Murin, I think, tussles for the ball inside his own half, lifts one to the opposite side of the pitch. It's just a long, hopeful ball into the Brighton left-back position. And incredibly, on the right-hand side, on almost the right winger, is Ray Butch Wilkins, who takes a touch, sets himself, cuts inside, and then delicately bends one into the top corner. It's not just a beautiful goal in terms of what Wilkins does. It's the way he wheels away as well afterwards.
And this is peak Wilkins seen as the crab territory, isn't it? I mean, Ray Wilkins is someone who the world kind of reevaluated. He came back from Italy and had some nice times in, in his later years in the Premier League, QPR and all sorts of people, and they want Ray Wilkins again. There's a whole period where Ray Wilkins he can only go sideways, and this is absolutely in the peak of it, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's unfair, isn't it? Because the stuff you read about Wilkins, he sounds like a genuinely nice bloke, a really nice fella as well. And he was obviously a very good footballer, obviously. But even as a kid, I remember being frustrated watching him in World Cups when I felt Wilkins was just playing it sideways. My memory of Ray Wilkins is swearing at ball boys in World Cups and passing the ball sideways. And that seems a bit unfair in so many ways for him, really.
And throwing the ball aggressively at referees in World Cups as well.
Yeah, that's it. But no, that's a beautiful goal. Let's leave it there.
So you don't see a chance that Brighton can pull it back, really. They've not really had any other chances. That it has been backs to the wall. And then actually, it's a very smart corner for their equaliser because they're in the 80-something minute or so. They should just be working in for a big guy in there, shouldn't they? But they play it short. It makes its way to Gareth Stevens, who takes a touch and knocks it in, scores a brilliant goal. Yes, so incredibly, we get to 2-2 and it's extra time. Wembley is notoriously sapping to play on at the best times, especially when you get into extra time. I can't imagine what that pitch was like to play in. It's black in places, isn't it? It's a really weird pitch where the bits that haven't got cut up are actually still beautifully green and pristine. And then you've got this whole black smudge in the middle. Bylines are absolutely covered in that's totally black as well. There's only one sub at the time. They must be so heavy-legged by that stage.
Yeah, the only time I could think of Wembley being worse than that was in 1969 when Arsenal played Swindon at Wembley, and they held the Horse of the Year show on the Wembley pitch, I think a week or two before the League Cup finals that year, because, the pitch was cut up all over the place. And lo and behold, the ground staff have got to get ready because there's a Thursday night replay on the way.
But there shouldn't be. Even now, it is painful to watch. And I read somebody quite interesting. I was obviously a Brighton fan saying that even now he's split between, Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays. He thinks it's a good save from Bailey. And the other 4 days, he just can't believe Smith hasn't scored. And in fairness, Smith's done unbelievably well to get there. It's great work for Michael Robinson, who holds a couple of players off. And to have the awareness in the 119th minute, whatever it is, square it rather than have a shot when it opens up. And Smith is in so much space.
So McQueen, the other centre-back, who's effectively responsible for looking after Gordon Smith, gets sucked in because he could see that Robinson's got the better, I think it was Kevin Moran. So McQueen's come steaming across, and Robinson just drops his shoulder, cuts inside, and puts them both flat on their arses, and then can shoot. Yeah. He's a striker. He's a goal scorer. He could shoot, but I think he makes the right decision, and he just very delicately lays it into Smith, who, you say, Graham, has got all the time in the world to win the FA Cup for Brighton. And it literally is the last kick of the game.
Yeah, I've watched that moment many times, and as you say, Robinson does brilliantly. He puts a proper shoulder barge into Moran, doesn't he, and sort of battles him off, stays on his feet, and then just squares a beautiful ball in. And I've looked at it, and I'm thinking I would just hit it first time.
Yeah.
But then I'm reminding myself that I haven't been playing for 120 minutes or whatever it is. So my legs are going to be tired. My mind's tired. And I just take that reassuring touch. And as you said, Graham, at the start of this bit, is it a great save? Because Bailey comes out really, really quick, doesn't he? And closes it down.
You're absolutely right. When you watch it, I hadn't watched it for years, and watching it again, you know what's coming. And the first bit is, oh my God, he's in even more space than I remember. And he's even closer to the goal than I remember. Mm. But the moment he takes that touch, which isn't an illogical thing to do, Bailey has come out tremendously well. Because actually, there's not that much wrong with his shot, I don't think. I don't think there's much more he can do.
I feel sorry for him. I mean, I saw an interview with him sort of saying, you know, a relatively recent one saying, you know, that there's not too many days go by and I'm not reminded of that. You know, I'm forever remembered by that. He said, I could probably go to the South Pole and someone wouldn't, and he went, actually, but probably an Eskimo there will know about that one. He says himself. But I feel sorry for him because, in my opinion, Bailey wasn't the greatest goalkeeper of all time, but he was big, wasn't he? He was, what was he, 6'4" or something, 6'5"? And he kind of throws himself full body length and he springs forward. And it's that the touch isn't bad, as you say. And to be honest, I'd do the same. You take that touch to tee yourself up, but Bailey spread himself and he hits the target. He doesn't miss, but Bailey kind of scrambles it out with his lower leg, doesn't it? He hits his legs and comes out. But even now I watch that and I feel sorry for him because you think that you live with that moment for the rest of your life then, don't you? Because you would have won the cup. But I don't think there's an awful lot more he could have done, really, other than hit it first time. Yeah,
if he hit it first time and shanked it wide, he'd be more famous for that.
Yeah, why didn't he take a touch? You know, it's so easy with hindsight, isn't it? Take a touch and dink it over Bailey. But you know, as I said, the pitch is bobbly. They've been playing for 120 minutes, a bit under the cosh. It's last kick of the game. He's exhausted mentally and physically. He takes the touch and he doesn't do it. And the famous line is immortalised by the great radio commentator Peter Jones, isn't it?
Yeah, it is incredible. I mean, I think everyone knows Smith must score. But of course, actually, not that many of us would have heard it at the time. It's what we think of it, and it's incredible how a piece of radio commentary in the TV age is the piece that has lasted.
Yeah, and immortalised in fanzines as well, because in 1988, Brighton named one of their fanzines "And Smith Must Score," which I think is a brilliant name, and it just kind of really reinforces how football fans think and deal with stuff, because that's a painful moment in Brighton and Hove Albion's history. Yeah, the Brighton fans have the pride and the humour to name a fanzine after that moment. It encapsulates what football fans can be about.
Smith, ironically, completed an unlucky double. He wasn't very lucky in finals that season because he had been on loan for Rangers earlier in the season and played in the Scottish League Cup final where they lost to Celtic. There is another game. There is a replay 5 days later. I can't bring myself to watch that back. But Steve Foster is back. In theory, it is a stronger Brighton side. And they start okay, don't they? But I think once United take the lead, that game is only going to be won by one team.
I remember my memories as a kid being so excited to watch the FA Cup final, not necessarily being a Brighton or a Man U fan, just wanting to watch live football, as Jamie has discussed, being so excited for that game. And then I remember being really excited because Steve Foster was back. Brighton were going to be stronger. And of course, I almost remember being quite disappointed because the game was done so early on, wasn't it? I think United get an early goal and then they never get going, and their moment had come and gone 3-4 days earlier, hadn't it? And that was it. Game over. But I'll let Jamie enjoy picking over the bones over those goals going in. I can't do it.
Yeah, there's lots to enjoy from a United perspective. The fact that, again, an FA Cup final replay on a Thursday night, I miss that. I love that. A Thursday night football was just something special. And again, there's something, I'm sounding like a proper nostalgic idiot at the moment, but We're never going to see that again because everything's decided on the day with extra time and penalty shootouts. But yeah, United are 3-0 up at half time, 2 goals from Robson, who is absolutely on it, a goal from Whiteside. And then as we discussed, Graham, with Rick, when we talked about Ron Atkinson's Manchester United during this period, Brian Robson gives up the opportunity to score a hat-trick in the FA Cup final and gives the ball to Alan Mullery to take the penalty, who's never taken a penalty in his life. He puts it away and makes it 4-0.
And it was the third consecutive final to go to a replay, which at that time, as a kid, was just a real bonus because you got another game. That was just you got extra time on the set. You absolutely spoiled. You got an extra half hour, and like you, Jamie, that was really my memory. I was so gutted that it wasn't a competitive game. So as a neutral on it. That is sort of, the Brighton story and the Jimmy Melia story end pretty rapidly after that. Gary Stevens is sold in the summer, and Michael Robinson is sold in the summer as well. Michael Robinson joins Liverpool before he goes on to have the most unlikely later career, doesn't he? I think is it Espanyol he joins? He joins someone in Spain.
Osasuna, in northern Spain, yeah.
And this is pretty rare. This is kind of Jan Molby in reverse, isn't it? This is somebody who just buys into the culture and immediately fits in.
I just remember seeing him, turning on the TV and just seeing Michael Robinson speaking fluent Spanish, commentating on a goal thinking, when did that happen?
With the most perfect suntan you could ever wish to have.
Yeah, I'm thinking, it's incredible. And fair play to him. Absolutely fair play to him.
And has a lengthy career on Spanish TV, which is pretty extraordinary.
For want of a better description, he becomes the Gary Lineker of Spanish TV. He really becomes the principal TV presenter on football, even rugby he does as well. And he even has a show named after him, Inform Robinson. He's that much of a big draw in Spanish football culture. I think he just connected with the place. He just found that he was probably looking for something at that moment. His football career was coming to an end. And there was something about the fact that it was sunny 300 days of the year that may have connected with him.
And when we think about, footballers get quite a bad rap, and sometimes fairly or otherwise, for not necessarily joining in the culture. I don't think Mark Hughes necessarily really settled in Barcelona when he joined there. I'm not sure Ian Rush did necessarily. There's lots of players.
Ian Rush, I think I've said this before, and I don't think this is true, but I like to think it's true. He said he couldn't get on in Italy because it was like being in a foreign country. I don't think he said that, but I believe it to be true.
So Michael Robinson, very good language skills, and had a bit of a presence over there, and actually developed some voiceover work. So he did some TV adverts and bits and pieces. He also voiced the ugly sister in the Spanish version of Shrek. No, that is something, isn't it?
Doris. He voices the character Doris. It's a brilliant fact. And the character was voiced in the UK by Jonathan Ross and in the United States by Larry King. So there you go. I mean, this is where Michael Robinson is. If you need to understand the man's stature, he is being put in the same bracket as Larry King and Jonathan Ross.
Yeah, absolutely. Sadly, Michael Robinson died quite young. He died 4 or 5 years ago, aged only 62 or so, which is very sad. But absolute legend there. Brighton, so they start life in the second tier the following season, and it quite quickly appears that winning games in the second division is no easier than in the top flight. And Brighton are struggling away. Now, it looks to me, from what I've read about this chap called Chris Catlin, who comes in as a coach, and there's a bit of an argument as to who is going to pick the team. And Jimmy Melia feels undermined, and so he resigns. But then there's this really weird thing where the following week he pays his money, goes in to watch the game in the home end.
He does. He Amazing. Does. It's mad, isn't it? And they lift him onto their shoulders, don't they? The fans.
Yeah.
They lift Melia onto the shoulders and chant Melia in, Bamba out. And yet the facts of the matter are that he only won 7 out of the 35 league games he was in charge. And it just shows you the romance of the FA Cup can just give you that longevity and that history that actually factually wasn't really there.
Yeah, they've had the cup run, which does this incredible stuff. I think there's something about Melia himself. He's obviously, he's a bubbly, enthusiastic character. I think if you're a Brighton fan, you're loving that, oh my God, people are talking about our team. This is fantastic.
It just absolutely endorses the character that he is, that he's capable of those ways of getting attention and how he does it as well. But yeah, Jamie, you're absolutely right. He's given the Brighton Hove fans, a day out that they're never going to forget. He's taken them to Wembley in an era when it's absolutely romantic to get to the FA Cup final.
That is his last major management role. I think he actually turns up at Stockport.
Yeah, he goes on, doesn't he, to managing Portugal, and he helps a second tier Belenenses, forgive the pronunciation, and they get promoted to the Premier Liga. And then he gets appointed at Stockport County, and then he does the thing which is very in vogue at the moment. He goes off to the United Arab Emirates and sets up an academy there, and then he sort of drifts back into sort of youth team coaching at Liverpool and America and Texas and that kind of thing, doesn't he? And I think he's still going, isn't he? I think he's 88 or something.
88 years old, still kicking around.
The fans don't get the wish about Jimmy Melia coming back. They do get the wish about Mike Bamber. He resigns as chairman, I think, later in 1984, and he's gone shortly afterwards. But the period that comes after this game is pretty horrendous for Brighton. And within 10, 12 years or so, they are homeless and relying on a last-day survival to stay in the league. Obviously, things have got better since then, but there you go. Right, we should get to ranking this team. As reminded, we've got 5 categories: greatness, all-time greats at the top, true greats, touch greatness in the middle, maybe more relevant, edge for this one, edge of greatness, our second bottom category, and blinkered greats. Jamie, where are you going with this?
Yeah, so what is great about Brighton and Hove Albion is that they're the only football team in the English league to have 4 words in their name, and no other football team has that accolade.
Tick.
So
Tick.
I don't know how much of that is going to influence my judgment over the next couple of moments. But anyway, where am I going to rank them? Well, sadly, Graham, as much as I love this and I've had a great time, I can't go any better than blinkered greats. I mean, I can't even put them in not great. Without them, we wouldn't be where we are today, because there's been 8 other football teams that have only got to one FA Cup final and lost. So they're not even unique in that sense. So the best I can give you right now, and this is for you and Mr. South Coast Jamie to work with, is blinkered greats.
Yeah, I think when Mr. Rooney opened up with his ranking by talking about the amount of words in their name, we're clutching at straws a little bit here, aren't we, to get him up the ladder? So I've got nothing to add. If I could have found out if Melia had married Val Lloyd, I might have upgraded them in the greatness, and yet the internet has failed me. I would have given them another notch on that ladder. I can't see any redeeming features as a football team. The only one, as we've discussed, it appeals to men of a certain and ladies of a certain age who are watching football when they were in their youth. They ticked a lot of great boxes in terms of helicopter flights in, and Tony Gubber doing interviews and all that razzmatazz madness around FA Cups at the time, giving us extra time and a replay, which is, as you said, Graham, as a kid starved of live football, it was like, oh, this is brilliant. But yeah, I can't give them anything high. So yeah, I'll go the same as Jamie.
I think you have to lean in and embrace the blinkered greats. It's a good thing. They are, to all intents and purposes, not a great football side, but they were absolutely fantastic. And the magic of the FA Cup is a bit overrated, but they definitely had the magic that year. And in Jimmy Melia, they had the most unlikely man to lead it and love it. And you had someone who absolutely was made for the big occasion and made everything he could out of it. And there are so many stories off the back of this team. But we have to say, Jimmy Melia's Brighton and Hove Albion blinkered greats. Go on then, Jamie. Why do you think they got the helicopter?
Well, you can get involved in this. It's definitely encroaching on your territory. But I'll start with a fact. Did you know this FA Cup final, the 1983 FA Cup final between Brighton and Hove Albion and Manchester United, was the very last FA Cup final that the two teams played without sponsors on their shirts?
That's a good one.
So sponsorship on shirts was happening during this era. It was a fairly new thing. It had been around for 3 or 4 years, but because of TV regulations, you weren't allowed to advertise on your shirts. Now, they were permitted from the 83-84 final, and that's why when we see Watford play Everton, we see, I think, Hafina and Inverco.
It's King of Ham, Hafnia, isn't it? And I would guess it is, I want to say it's something like Daft Trucks, or no, it's what?
It's Inverco. I think it's Inverco. I think it's that. So I think the helicopter trip was a PR stunt. And I think it was a PR stunt based on the shirt sponsor of Brighton and Hove Albion at the time, which was British Caledonian Airlines. Because the helicopter is quite conveniently with the British Caledonians airline sign right across the body of the aircraft. So I think and Graham, please lean into this, I think it's a PR stunt.
I did see a picture of someone with British Caledonian on their shirt. Go based in Gatwick, so that makes a lot of sense. And so I, too, think that must be the way. I mean, Arsenal, could they go in via the Emirates Sky cable thing?
They could build a sky cable all the way from Docklands to Wembley just for Arsenal to travel.
I like that. I like that idea.
That would be good. That would be a neat bit of sponsorship.
Emirates, here's a marketing idea for you. Yes. Anyway, that's a happy place to end. We should finish it there. South Coast, Jamie. Thank you for venturing further down the South Coast. I mean, as you say, we are going to struggle a bit. I don't know. Does Plymouth count?
No, Plymouth do not count. And I refuse to go on a podcast about Plymouth. You can have that right now. It's been fun. It's good to be your South Coast correspondent. I think my time is up. I hand my badge in and my gun, walk away silently into the distance. But no, it's been great fun. I've enjoyed it. Slightly outside my comfort zone. But honestly, reading up about Jimmy Melia was, you forget as a kid how kind of entertaining and different he was, really. And yeah, it was good fun.
Regular Jamie, thank you as ever.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. This has been wonderful. This is such a sweet spot. And Jamie, I hope your badge and gun can get collected and you come on again and we find other teams.
Get me out of retirement. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you might have set yourself up as the cup final correspondent. So because you got the Luton Town League Cup final.
We did.
Coventry City.
Yeah, we did, didn't we? Yeah.
FA Cup final TV build-up. Oh, you've not handed your badge in. You've just been rebranded.
I have. I've been upscaled.
Excellent. We enjoyed that one a lot. Well, how do you follow a team like Brighton and the FA Cup final 1983? Well, probably the only way to do it is to go to Leyton Orient.
You can bring your dinner.